I'd like to call the workshop of the Board of Public Education to order. We're here this evening to workshop the school board budget, and I guess I will just go ahead and turn it over to staff to get us started.
Do you want to do attendance or?
Oh, sure. Let's do attendance.
Okay.
Will the superintendent please call the roll?
Sure. Absolutely, Madam Chair. Mr. Atkinson.
Here.
Ms. Seeliger.
Here.
Ms. Vendil. Ms. Davis.
Here.
Ms. Thompson.
Here.
Ms. Morioni.
Here.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Presente.
Mr. Balfons.
Here.
And Chair Trevorrow.
Here.
Okay, so today we are going to workshop the budget in order to be able to give the City Council an indication of what the reductions in our budget would look like at different levels of funding. So what we are prepared to do today is to sort of walk through, and maybe we can get that. Mr. Balfons, would you mind slipping the? So what we're proposing to do is to walk through at different levels what the reductions might look like. And I just want to preface this by saying that with my team, we've prioritized what that order would be, but that is obviously your decision to make. And there are things up on the screen that are not in our prioritization for cuts. So that you can sort of look at that as that's our prioritization, but again, we understand that these are ultimately board decisions, so you can engage in discussions about those other items as well. And, we're prepared to talk about why we've selected the things that we've selected, and we'll then let you discuss those as well. So just to orient you to what you're looking at, and maybe I should look at mine here instead of trying to crane my neck and read it up there, is the first set of items on those on that list. So in that first column that says reductions, those are pretty much all of the things that we've looked at over the course of this budget process. So it includes the administrative cuts, it includes middle school electives, elementary class size. You can read all the way down and see that those are all of the things that we've looked at. When you get to item 18, those are the proposed investments. So those are all of the things that we have added to the budget as part of my original budget proposal, which are all still in here. And I will remind you that there were additional things that were in my proposed budget that are now included under the administrative cuts. So things such as our investment in content area leadership at the district office. Those were eliminated in the previous round when we went from the finance committee to the board budget, and so that's included in those numbers at the top. So all the way down, and then I will just sort of point you to these reductions of teachers. Those are, if you recall, in the Finance Committee of the Council, they asked us for some, what it would take to make additional cuts to get to a certain number, and they wanted those quantified as actual just sort of teacher FTE. So For our purposes today, we're sort of thinking of those as sort of placeholders, so that when we get down to a budget reduction that is at the 3.5 or the 3% level, so all the way over on the right-hand side, when we get there, we don't have the necessary cuts quantified elsewhere, and so we would be looking at either just saying we'll take additional positions, or we will take other things to make up for that amount. So that's what's over on the left-hand side, and then across, what you see is, the quantified of the possible reductions, which I've just talked through, then what we considered on 327, and then what we actually wound up cutting on 330. So that's the budget as it stood the last time that the Finance Committee met and turned it over to the board. And then what you see on 412 is what we actually wound up cutting, which is everything that was on the 330 plus the addition of some utility reductions that we got from the city. So that is the budget as it currently stands, a reduction of 1.5 million from what was in my original proposed budget. And then, sort of continuing on to the right, you see what it would take to get to 5.5, to get to 5.0, to get to 4.5, to get to 4, to get to 3.5, to get to 3. So we've done that in 0.5 increments to to make it sort of doable to sort of work through this. And then under those, remember, they're all dated as 5/8, so as of today, none of those have actually been operationalized, but as we work through this tonight, our goal is to be able to say, if we go down to 5.5, we need to reduce, if you look at the bottom, we would need to reduce an additional $774,000, and this is the way that we would accomplish that. If we needed to go to a 5.0 increase, then we would need to eliminate $1.17 million, and this is how we would do that, and so on. So, any questions about this? And then I'll start in the prioritization of these items. And then I also want to point out that we did receive a series of questions from Board Member Davis that I believe everybody has a copy of the answers to those. So at some point, probably, when it makes sense, or we can do it now, or we can do it, as those options come up, we can walk through those, the answers to those questions.
And this is what's in front of them.
So what's in front of them?
But the one in front of them is this.
Oh,
So we
so
haven't
it's not
broken these
this
out
one?
yet. They don't have them.
Okay.
So
All right. But do they have copies of it?
they will.
All right, well, let's give them the copies. So I've just learned that what we did in Cabinet today, which was to make some adjustments to the prioritization, is not what you have in front of you, because we sent this to you yesterday, so there is a revised version that you are getting now.
Thank you.
And is that what's up on the?
I will put that up.
Okay.
This is what everyone out in front has a copy of.
So this is like the big mystery, like all of a sudden we're
Yeah,
on.
we have
that way,
secret
this is-
paper and
we
no
have
one else
secret- Okay, all right.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. So, this is what we're discussing now. So, the differences are, there's been some reprioritization, starting at level 4.5.
Yeah.
And down towards the bottom, we, as the superintendent was just explaining, we pushed over to the 3.5 level.
the teaching reductions, and we also broke them out by elementary, middle, high school based on our student population. So we tried to do that proportionately to where our teaching population is. Is my thing-
Alicia,
Yes.
do you have 2 more of those?
I have one more.
Gotcha.
I don't need them.
Okay, so at the 5.5 level, what we need to reduce is $774,000. And the way that I'm proposing to accomplish this is through elementary class size and the middle school electives reduction. So those are the, as I said during the Finance Committee meeting, and I want to be clear about this, none of these are my cuts. These are, the things that we would need to do if we were put in a situation where the council says to us that we need to reduce our budget, and at that point is when we would have to do that. And so elementary class size is, again, not ideal by any stretch of the imagination, but we believe that those class size reductions that we're proposing keep us within the range that currently exists within the school system. And so it just, it reduces 6 positions. I want to be real clear. I know that we've had folks from Riverton that talked about potentially having 27 students in a class. That would not occur under our proposal, so I just want to be very clear about that. The numbers that we used were the numbers that we had on March 1st. Those numbers change over the course of the year, and, just like this year at the beginning of the school year, we added a kindergarten position at East End that was not in our budget because we had numbers that materialized at East End that required that. If we were in a situation where we went over, in the case of a second grade classroom, if we went over the number of 23 per class, then we would add an additional position. So I just want to be very clear about that. I don't want there to be any misinformation about that. So we would, in every instance, increase the staffing if the threshold were tripped, as it were. So
We can put that up on the screen.
Is that a change in our general practice? Because in analyzing our current state, we had 6 classes that were well over, in some cases well over, the range. And I think what we have done in the past is that we do an analysis at the time based on the teacher, their ability to handle an additional child in that particular class, the makeup of that particular class. This is not...
Yeah, I did not mean to say that it would be instantaneous because, as you know, classroom sizes change over the course of the year, and so one day you may have 26, and then the next day you may have 24. So it would always be based on an analysis and making sure that we knew that that was a stable number. And again, there are different ways to address it, and there have been instances where it's addressed by adding additional supports in the classroom in the way of ed techs and things along those lines until the next school year, so that we're not in this constant state of churn. So I appreciate you bringing that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure that we weren't changing or that we weren't confusing the public to say that the moment it hit 23, there'd be a new teacher in there. It might be an ed tech. It might be looking at some way of managing that particular class, that particular situation, because there are some classes of 23 where that would be just fine.
Yeah.
Teachers experienced can handle it. The makeup of the class is not a problem. Somewhere adding an ed tech and making sure that the work between the teacher and the ed tech, and most of our ed techs are ed tech 3s, I believe. Many are actually certified teachers themselves. So in essence, you have 2 teachers in the classroom and could deal with that. Also, the other thing I think we should think about is in some schools, we are Title I schools, and there are additional funds that are available to potentially respond to that as well.
I saw
I just
Sarah
want
had
the
her
public
hand
to
up.
be sure that they understood that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Superintendent, and could you just go over again middle school elective program reductions? We have the page in here that says number of teachers, King 2, Lincoln 2, Moore 2, and then talks about salary, medical, Medicare,
Yeah.
so on and so forth. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, please, and
Yeah,
what that
so
means?
again, this is one that we discussed at length during the Finance Committee process. This is no different from what we discussed at that time. So this would be the reduction of the general music program at all three of the middle schools, and then the reduction of another elective position, which would vary among the three different schools, but the principals have, we've consulted with them, and they have a good understanding of what they would reduce. This obviously eliminates a program, so that's general music, not choral music, not band, just general music as an elective. And that is, not ideal again, but something that would, that would not cause students who are deeply committed to developing their musical talent to not be able to do that. And then the other program would, again, vary from school to school, but it would be one of the electives that that the school would make a decision to eliminate. It will make scheduling harder at the middle school, so it's, a big part of middle school organization is being able to ensure that there are enough options available to students when teachers are in their team meetings, and there has to be enough variation in those activities to make them engaging for students and so on. So it will make the scheduling more difficult in middle schools. But again, that's one where the impact, there would still be electives in the middle school. We would still have the ability to provide in-depth music instruction to students who are interested in that, and it's not ideal, but it's something that that's what we're proposing to do.
And how many students does this affect? Do we have numbers for the classrooms for these?
We do, somewhere in your packet, there is an analysis of middle school class sizes, so you would see the range of students.
It's not in this packet, it's for tomorrow. That was something that was requested by the City Finance Committee, so it's, you have it in front of you. It's going to be posted online on the city's webpage today. And
Okay.
we'll go through that at length at tomorrow's meeting.
Okay, I was just looking at the middle school elective program reductions page, and it just seemed very general.
At that time, yeah, we hadn't made specific choices.
And so it's in this other packet you're saying here? In the thicker one?
So,
Yes, there is a middle school.
just say what
With further discussion?
So
sizes are.
the class sizes range from 19 to 20 at King, 20 to 22, and 10 to 20 to 22 at Lincoln, and 10 to 13 at Moore. So, and that's times 5 sections that teachers, 4.
So general music for,
Yeah. How many sections does a teacher teach for? Yeah, so that gives you the idea of how many students are affected. You have how many?
More sections.
More sections.
More
That's why you're
sections at
called
Moore?
more?
so again, I'm sorry, Javier, but can you, again, just explain the difference between general music versus, I'm just a little confused, because I know that we've talked over the years about, cutting band, and we've talked about cutting this and that, and so I guess I don't totally get the general music.
I'm not going to do it justice, so I will turn to the principals or Mrs. Crocker to
That would be great.
help with that. But, general music is music appreciation, music history, things along those lines. It's not instrumental music, so.
Ben Donaldson, principal at Moore. Sue Ellen.
Sue Ellen Santiago, principal at Lincoln.
So, sixth grade general music is an offering that our teachers and our community see as extremely valuable in terms of keeping students learning about music and hopefully not giving up that kids would have decided they wanted to play an instrument or be involved in music at some point by the time they get to middle school. So, if I were channeling or the music teacher, she would say, this is a really important class because kids can still get interested at that point. I was observing last week or the week before, and it was a small group of kids who was doing music appreciation. So they were learning about the legendary hip-hop song Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang. And so it was a 10-minute mini lesson about what that song is and what it meant for music. So all of our sixth grade students are involved in that offering. If they choose to do one of the other ones, band or chorus or orchestra, then it can be in place of this general music offering. But it's a chance for kids to learn music appreciation, and she sees it as a gateway to more music throughout the rest of their time in school.
And at Lincoln, it's slightly different. We have this year a new development in our schedule where we're having 90-minute related arts intensives. So kids are still getting a full year of the equivalent of a full year of general music like they would before, but it's split over 2 years. So they have time in sixth grade and time in eighth grade. So it's not just to one grade level. But again, same as Ben said, music theory, general appreciation of music, kind of appreciation of the arts. And in our case, kids would get that class in addition to band, chorus, orchestra, or handbells, which are provided at alternative times in our day. While we would not be in support of this cut, students would not lose their opportunities to excel in those areas at our school. That would remain available.
So while you're there, it says general music program and another elective at each school. And so not going in blindly saying, well, just choose an elective. What are you thinking to put you on the spot?
So I think part of why it's another elective is we have all very different things. And this has evolved over the years due to retirements and change in certifications. When I was in middle school, there was an industrial arts class. There was a home ec class, right? Everybody had that. That's not the case now because a lot of those certifications have changed. And as people retire, we've looked at offering related arts electives that might meet some of the same components, but might be a little bit more responsive to what kids need now. So I can't speak for King. We could certainly say what our electives are. In my case at Lincoln, we have multiple technology electives over the 3 years. So that's one place where we may look. I, to be honest, haven't made a decision as to what that would look like, but we have technology, digital literacy, and engineering technology. So 3 of our 6 electives are in the technology realm. And so that could be a place where we might look versus cutting something like art, where, we have one art teacher, that would not be my choice.
Just back on music for 1 second. So we do the sixth grade general music offering. We also do piano for eighth grade students, which is part of the general music position at Moore. So that's a trimester elective style class for eighth graders. So we have 2/3 of our eighth graders who are learning to play piano for a trimester as part of what we're asking that teacher to do, and she's doing it quite successfully. I would say if it comes to cutting another elective position, it's going to be a really tough decision, and we haven't made a decision. And for any of the teachers who know that we're looking at this, they know that it's a potential electives cut. So those folks are nervous. But I would say that in our related arts offerings, we have PE, we have health, we have 2 computer positions. We have a family and consumer science position. We have this general music position. So those are what we have to choose from if we are choosing to eliminate part of a program.
Anyone else?
I'll just speak briefly about my own experience with general music in middle school. This even just bringing this topic up brought back a lot of memories. And my general music teacher, when I was in middle school, was fantastic and is one of those teachers that I look back on and think about really fondly. We had it in 7th and 8th grade. And we learned in 7th grade, it was classical music. We learned history. It was a lot of musical history. learned, your Mozart, Beethoven, that stuff. But then in 8th grade, we had a choice, and this was really cool. We got to decide whether we want to do show tunes or the 60s. And those were our two choices of ways to go. And I was very glad that my class chose the 60s. It was awesome. It was really, really great. I mean, it was cool that we had the choice to do it. But it's one of those things it's stuck with me all this time. And I was a band kid. I played the bassoon, if you can imagine it. So I did that all through high school. And but the general music class was valuable in itself, and it's not something that it's something that I hope that we can stay away from. I wouldn't have my appreciation of the Beach Boys if it wasn't for Miss Zweifel's class in 8th grade. So a lot of appreciation for general music from this board member. Thanks.
Sarah?
Just had a follow-up. On the Deering High School, what is the difference between band and then band HR and band? What's the HR stand for?
We'd not go down.
I was just curious as to what HR was. That I would call it out.
Honors, but I don't.
Oh, is that what it is, honors?
Yeah, it's honors, so.
Okay. All right.
All of the HRs are honors.
Honor. Okay, thank you.
And I guess the reason I didn't want to do that is because we're not looking at this level. We're not looking at any of the high school cuts. So I think that's just, yeah, so. So I guess for the board, how do you want to proceed with these? Do you want us to walk all the way through everything and then, sort of have a straw poll, or I feel the sense that we need to have some level of understanding for the public and for the council around what the board's sort of support for those cuts would be if we were in the situation that we needed to reduce the budget to that level.
Lori?
I think in order to really have a productive discussion, I guess I'm concerned about simply looking at this budget through the same lens we've looked at it thus far. So what I did was to really step back and approach it philosophically in a different way. And perhaps it's the way that I approach budgets in my own work, and it's the way I've approached budgets when I worked for the district. And so, we have a group that's already approved. That's 1.5 million-ish. And then I have what we see as an administrative adjustment to right-size the organization, and that's the reduction in the 6 elementary school positions, which I shared an analysis of that showed the impact and would show that we actually would then guarantee that, or start out at this point, based on our current information, that all classes fell within the ranges that we've established, which is not currently the case. There was variation. There would still even be classes that were below the minimum range. But it would essentially have a starting point. To me, that's a right-sizing, administrative correction that in other years I have seen made actually before the budget even comes to the school board. Because part of budgeting is looking at your organization and right-sizing it before you actually take that budget to the decision makers. So we have that. Then I often approach, especially when we have a shortfall in revenue and we have increased expenditures such as the negotiated contract, to essentially go that I start with the no increases without offsets. And so I looked through the budget essentially quickly, this was this morning, and identified 3 places where there were significant. There was $762,000 of increases with no offsets. Now, I've gotten some more information that may explain that some of those increases have to do with contracting increases and some other things, and that just came in this afternoon while I was at work. So I haven't had a chance to roll that through and see what would get backed out of that. But that was the increase in temp, sub, and overtime of $186,727. Wages, the ad pay, stipend, differentials, stipend other of $344,654, and a general supplies increase of $231,461. And then I would also approach a budget that I would need to see an incredible rationale to have new expenditures, again, without offsets. So that then goes to some of the positions that are coming off of grants. Having been here when we approved the Nellie Mae grant, this was one of the things that almost did not get that grant approved, because the board at that time spent a long time talking about approving that. It was a close vote in sort of sense of the board, because we were concerned about what would happen at the end and picking up those expenses. And so those positions come off. Extended learning coordinators, the Reiki assistant principal, which troubles me because when we went to the teacher leader model, we made a conscious decision to reallocate the funding that was there for principal and assistant principal in a different model. And I'm concerned because the board hasn't discussed that again. Make It Happen coordinator, the stipends at Portland High that are part of Nellie Mae, the increases in adult ed, director of social emotional learning coming off a grant, and a new social worker. Those two areas of no increases or new expenditures is $1.5 million, and we have not on this board had a serious conversation about those. And I think we need to, about how we approach it. And then you can get to what are actually reductions. But what we haven't discussed is what I see as a significant amount of increase without offsets. And in this budget environment, I would only expect to see increases with offsets from the existing budget to hold us as close as possible to the minimum increase necessary. So I kind of propose that we look at this differently. You know, going back to this one particular one, I don't think we have to go to middle school electives, and I wouldn't. You know, we have talked a little bit about one of the things that's in the ad pay, and that's a 2-day summer institute for staff. It's additional pay of almost $200,000. You know, this district actually made a conscious decision at one point to move away from that kind of professional development, which some researchers feel is less effective because it's off, it's removed from practice, it isn't embedded, it's not something where you go and you go back and practice. It doesn't necessarily model good pedagogy. It's like going for a 2-day lecture or conference and then going back several weeks, months later to your school and implementing that. I haven't heard a persuasive argument about that's the way we should do this, especially given that we've negotiated into our teacher contracts significant amounts of time for professional development. Early release Wednesdays. I mean, that was a topic with our teachers where we really negotiated in additional professional development time. So I think we need to talk about the increases in this budget that are there, and they are not reductions. They aren't in our current budget. They only end up being discussed as reductions because they were included in the superintendent's budget. And so I'd propose that we kind of go at this a little differently and a little differently philosophically, and see if that gets us to a different place, rather than continue to discuss the things we've already discussed. So just a suggestion.
Do you want me to speak to the stipends?
Would you like us to clarify the stipends and all of that, or do you want to discuss first approaching it from a different angle?
I don't know. Board. What would the board like to do?
Maybe we'll discuss the approach first. I saw Roberto had his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I just wanted to, if we are going to kind of follow that lead, I wanted to pick at least one of the items of the new expenditures and talk about them the way that I've reviewed them. The ELO coordinator over at Portland, excuse me. So I had a chance to go last Tuesday over to Portland and visit the JMG program, and was expecting to sit down with Moynihan, sorry. but he wasn't there. So, which actually worked out really well because I had a chance to sit down with the actual students without any other adults in the room. And then, so these were juniors and 4 wonderful young women. And they were explaining to me how they work with the freshman students to help them get like job shadowing opportunities and learning how to fill out applications. And then that leads to the sophomore year where they actually do the job shadowing. And then in the junior year where they're helping the underclassmen. And then it culminates in the senior class where they're actually like applying for different jobs and even part of the college application process. So I had like this really, really amazing time. Spent over an hour together with these young people and just see how excited they were and how much they gain out of those opportunities. One of them, which is really interesting, 2 of them actually did job rotations in the medical field. One of them did a CNA rotation at, I think it was either Mercy or one of the other major hospitals. And the other one went to one of the assisted living facilities that I go to frequently. So it was pretty neat to hear her talk about some of the experiences. And so what touched me about it was that that's how I bumped into my career. You know, somebody gave me an opportunity to go tour the hospital, meet some of the people that were working there. Went to the radiology department, went to the ER, eventually went to the rehab facility, and I was like, oh, that looks like a lot of fun. That's kind of like being a trainer, being a therapist, and it's what engaged me. And sure enough, that's what I ended up going to school for. And look at me, I'm pretty damn good at it, you know, because I enjoyed it, you know, because I found something that I connected with, and so that you know, that grew that passion. But I was practically an adult when that happened. I was like in my early 20s. These young teenage years that these young people are getting the opportunity to do it. I could just see how all these seeds are being planted, and who knows who's going to bloom out of that, right? So, anyways, so there's one of the new expenditures that I wouldn't even consider even cutting. And this is one of those positions that were, you know, covered through a grant, and now we're hoping to shift it over to our budget. And so as I think about all the networking that goes into place to get to know these businesses that are taking our students as interns, and it's just the development of relationships that requires, to have the consistency in that position and to have the continuity in that position, I think that there's the value, right? Because you don't want to start from scratch, and you don't want to you know, break down some of those relationships that you're building. So maintaining that position, or rather transferring that position over to our budget and maintaining it as a full-time with somebody who's proven to be incredibly effective at it, again, I don't see there being an argument convincing me to not add that position. All right, I'll wait till someone brings the next one.
Do you mind if I just make a proposal on how because we're at 7:45 here, and so we have a lot of data that's been presented in front of us. I think, and you know, Lori has worked on more data that can inform our discussion. But I think, you know, tonight we're here because the council asked us to be here. We're not here because we're putting forward a new recommendation. We already made a recommendation to the council, and, you know, they should be reminded that, you know, we're aware of that. We're here for a sort of hypothetical situation that none of us want. And it's about sort of prioritizing, you know, reductions that none of us want to make in a hypothetical world. So I would propose that we look at a 5%, what it would take to get to a 5% increase, and we start with what we have in front of us and kind of straw poll the board and figure out how we might get to that. And quite frankly, I don't really want to workshop less than that. Because I don't, like Lori says, there's no point in it. What the council gives to us is ultimately what the council will give to us. And it's within our purview from there on. But I think, you know, getting to a 5% increase is a huge ask in the first place. So that's how and you know, if we get to a point where we don't agree with the reductions that are here, we just can't stomach any of them, there's all kinds of data that we've gotten throughout the course of this process that we could potentially bring back in, some of the earlier reductions, some of the things that Lori has brought to the table. But I would propose we just kind of start with what's in front of us, go from there.
Do you want to answer any of Ms. Davis's questions about the overtime and stipends and things like that?
Based on what I saw and what was sent to me, it's fairly detailed, and I think it will take me a while to digest, and I don't think that we could verbally convey that to the public or to the rest of the board in a way that would truly be understood tonight. I think if there are specific pieces that where we need to look at that, perhaps we can, but there was a lot of movement in that, and it will take a while to go back and kind of look at the entire context of what was shared, and that just came at like 3 this afternoon, late this afternoon.
We just
so.
got it from you yesterday, so
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
not, that we were just sitting around doing nothing, so.
Superintendent Botana, I am not being critical at all, so you don't need to be defensive. I'm just saying that the information was extremely complete, and I think it will be difficult to explain in a way that the public will understand when they're not looking at it, to digest and really be particularly helpful.
And I guess the reason that I'm suggesting that we might do that is because you've proposed that as one of the areas where the budget went up and that therefore might go down. And so I think that, if you're going to consider that as one of the options to get to 5% as Chair Tavaro suggested, then we probably ought to do that. But if you're good with us not doing that, I'm good not pushing it any further.
I think if we get to that point, at the moment, it's not on that list, on this list. So if it gets put on the list, perhaps it's useful, or perhaps some pieces of it are broken out, because I recognize that a significant portion of that increase in ad pay is the two-day institute.
That's right. Which doesn't kick in our proposal until the 4.5, which I just, I know that we just said that we weren't going to go to. So I think that's where, if we're not going to the 4.5, then we should.
I think if we kind of start with the 5% and what's on there, if, say, for instance, the board doesn't feel that middle school electives is one of our priority reductions, then we might add back in other items, so that, right, exactly. So at that point, I want to recognize Marnie had her hand up.
Thank you. This is where I'm at tonight. I don't want to look at this anymore. I mean, what I mean by that is I appreciate the Finance Committee saying, bring it back to your board, see if there's anything else you can do about it. But at this point, and I appreciate you saying, let's look at the 5 and see, but I feel like if we went to them and said, look, we got it at 5, and then they would say, okay, look, you were able to do that, so go back. And I'm very, very reluctant to move on any of these things right now, in the sense that these investments that the superintendent did put in the budget were also to support sort of the our Portland Promise, and particularly around Make It Happen, and around the adding positions around the high school assistants to our
Extended learning opportunities.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Say it again.
Extended learning opportunities.
Extended learning opportunities. Thank you. Point being is that I appreciate that. I'm gonna basically, whatever anybody else says we're gonna cut right now, I'm gonna be in opposition to it. I want this to stick, I want it to stand, and I want it to move forward, and have the council basically say, all right, have it on their heads right now, because we've done so much work around this. The staff has put the blood, sweat, and tears in it, and I think that this is the first time, and I said it last night in the council, where we've had a superintendent and staff which has been able to put together our priorities and the budget hand in hand. Normally, we're just cutting positions, cutting programs. We don't have a very coordinated effort around it. And finally, now I feel like with the Portland Promise and what we are trying to accomplish and moving forward, we can better articulate. But looking down this list here, we've already looked at this list. We've already looked to see if can we cut any more, honestly. And so yeah, I'll stop there. But thank you, Anna, for trying to say, let's pick this 5%, but I'm not up for that, but thank you.
Go ahead, Superintendent, and then I did notice Sarah had her hand up.
So I just want to be clear that we're not meeting today, at least not that I know of, to make any proposed reductions to our budget. We are meeting to prioritize what those reductions would be if we were told that we would only be able to raise 5% or, 6% or 3.5%. And so, and the reason that I had this conversation with Chair of the Finance Committee with Ms. Vendel in pushing to have this meeting was, I think that otherwise the narrative that I've heard on the council is one of, we just set the bottom line, and then the board, the board needs to go and do its work and make those cuts. And I don't think that it's fair to the board to be in a situation where, in essence, you're asked to make those cuts, and then you are the ones that are having to grapple with all of these things, and that it's not transparent to the council as they go and make that decision starting tomorrow and continuing into Monday. So, my advocacy for this session is so that there is a clarity on the council's side of what the board would prioritize if it were forced to make those decisions, which I think the board 8-1 has decided they did not want to make. And so I just want to, be clear that this is not that we're making these cuts today. We're saying these are the cuts that we would be forced to make if we were told that we can only raise 5%, if we can only raise 4.5%, and so on.
Sarah and then Lori.
I was just going to say, it kind of reminds me when I was chair for 2 years, and we talked to the Finance Committee, and they said, bring to us what you need, and then we'll go from there. And I think we've brought to them what we need, and we said back to them at those meetings is, you set the bottom line. So tell us how much money we have, and we'll make the decisions from there, because as they've said numerous times, they're the bottom line. They don't get to choose whether we have this or that. And so I think at this point, to concur with Ms. Morioni is, I think the council should just tell us how much money we have. They make that decision. We'll make a decision. I'm with Ms. Morioni tonight. I don't want to go and have a discussion around 5%, because having been here for 12 years, once we start that, we're going to go down, and we're going to go down, and we're going to go down. So to your point, we're not making reductions here tonight, so I don't even want to discuss any further reductions we have in front of us. I think we all can mull it, and like Ms. Davis has come up with other scenarios, and other people can look at things deeper. But until we have a bottom line from the council, I think that we have the data, we have the information, let's take it home, and we'll go from there and wait for the decision.
Ms. Davis.
I would, in essence, agree with you, probably coming at it from a slightly different point, but this is a workshop, and we can't take action tonight. We could do a straw poll, but that would be all it is. It is not binding. The council should not rely upon the actual vote to make changes at some later date to be the same, nor should the public. That once, should the budget come back to us at that point, we will have to do the work that the school board is charged to do, which is to decide how to spend the money that's allocated to us by the city council. I don't see that as a hardship. I see that as our job. We may not like the amount that we're given, but it is our job to transparently, clearly, at that point in time, make those decisions and discuss them in public so that the public knows why we've decided to do what we've decided to do. But tonight, we can't make any decisions. And if we signal something, it simply is a signal of how any one of us feels tonight based on the information we have at this point in time. And it is not at all binding. And so there is a degree of, does it make sense to have a lot of discussion at this point in time?
Roberto.
Thank you. So, this is a workshop, and I think I understand we're just going to kind of ask questions and figure out what these reductions mean. So I want to follow, once again, the point that Ms. Davis made, because I guess you said that you felt we had not discussed some of the additions to the budget, so I wanted to pick the next one, social emotional learning. And again, because it's a workshop, which is discussing the different items. So what's really, so when I was in the National School Board Conference earlier this year, it's over and over again, we're talking about any other topic that has to do with education, and then someone in the room will say something that has to do with social emotional learning, and then the instructor says, there you go. Now we've opened Pandora's box. Because that's like what everybody's talking about. And that's what everybody in education says. If you're going to invest in something, it's social emotional learning, because that's where you're capturing those guys or those students that have traditionally fell through the cracks. You know, the social emotional learning is now backing the way that we do pedagogy, you know, in this country. And we're seeing the results. So again, and we've seen it, you know, I've talked about it in other meetings, so I don't want to get into that in as much detail and emotion. But again, that's another, you know, new addition to the budget that we have discussed, and we've all felt through other aspects of our work, we've all felt that that's a priority, and that we wanted to continue investing in that. So that's that. I'll wait for the next one.
Lori.
I would not want anyone to walk out of here thinking that any of the things, the new expenditures, are things I don't support or believe in. My point is more that in this budget environment, I would be looking for offsets in the existing budget, things that are not working as well as they might. I'd be looking at cost effectiveness. And in the end, given whatever the amount is that we have to work towards, we may have to do that balancing. Are 2 ELO positions and what they accomplish, as good as it is, worth giving up all of middle school electives? Or world language, or, you know, pick another one off of here, or the proposed additions to adult ed. So it really, the discussion ultimately comes in, what is the target we have to hit, and what are the trade-offs that we need to make, given that really we are trading off a number of things that we would, if there was sufficient money, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I don't think the council is going to go fine. I think we may have to make additional reductions. And so the question for us will be, and it's not really a question entirely tonight because it's hypothetical, what are the trade-offs we would be willing to make at that point in time, knowing that we would be giving up some things that we'd really like to have and are highly effective and are great, but may not reach as many students as something else, as, you know, middle school music. And they're not easy choices because they're different. And they affect and impact different people. But I don't think, you know, I didn't want anyone to think that my suggesting that we not make those increases was that I didn't think those increases were good ones to make if we had the money. It's just that when I approach a budget with a limited target, that's where I really ask for questions, and I look for offsets in cutting things that are reducing things, right-sizing the organization, looking for economies in other places which may not be the most effective things we're doing.
Tim and then Roberto.
Oh, Tim, I'll be real quick. Yeah. Thank you. Really appreciate that, Brian. Yeah, I'm sorry. So, Ms. Davis, I didn't mean to imply that you would support these cuts. I was actually answering the point that you made earlier, which was that you felt we had not discussed these different items in detail. So I was just kind of bringing some of the perspective of how we have discussed them elsewhere in our work, and I personally how I've explored those items.
Yeah, I think how they're good. It's like we haven't weighed them.
I just wanted to make a more general point. I think we have a set of priorities and we have a set of goals in the Portland Promise that we can use to evaluate each of these line items. What effect does this have on equity? What effect does this have on the whole student? Are our investments, our cuts aligned with our plans so that we're making progress towards that plan? So I hope that we'll all, as board members, when we're making decisions, you know, if that comes to that point, that we are clear and that we're consistent in using that as our touchstone and as our framework to because that's where we see ourselves headed. That is, I think we as board members anyway, I think have pretty good buy-in on the Portland Promise. I think, you know, we need to do a more effective job clearly of communicating that with our with the rest of the city and in particular with the council, I think, because I don't think that they necessarily have bought into the promise and or I think that, just hearing them talk about the budget a little bit, I think they're not sure what our decision-making framework is. And so I'm hopeful that we will we'll stay close to that Portland promise and continue to make strides in those directions, in the directions of the four tenets of that.
I would agree with Mr. Atkinson that I have been looking forward to having a strategic plan that really did focus our efforts. What I think I have felt a little surprised at, and this may be true for the community and the council as well, is that there was nothing in the rollout of that indicated that it was going to come with a lot of additional invoices for additional expenditures. What I hoped I would see was a tightening and a focus and a laser, a cutting away of the things that are okay but really don't get to it. And a very persuasive rationale for any increases that were proposed. That I haven't seen yet, and it's early. So I think we're still feeling our way through it, but I think it is our lens to use. I think what we surprised the public, and certainly this board member, was that this was going to cost me a whole lot more money. I thought it was going to help organize us within our existing financial footprint to do a better job and shift our paradigm to be more effective. Because it's shifting the paradigm of education, as IB has done at Ocean Avenue, where it really has shifted the way that staff, those teachers, and those students are approaching education. That shift of the paradigm is what we need to do to actually move achievement in this district. Simply more money won't hurt, probably, but it may not actually come to the bottom line of achievement.
I guess, sorry, if I can respond. I think that of the four, the one that's expensive is equity, in my mind. I think that in order to achieve equity, in order to, there's the little cartoon that we saw at the last meeting of, the one student is shorter and needs a stool. It's that stool that costs money, in my mind. It's that additional support that those students need to raise their achievement up to the level that we expect. That cost money. I think there are certainly ways to approach it and ways to find other things to cut to be more efficient to make it there. But I think that when you try to achieve equity, that costs money.
I actually found when I analyzed our elementary class sizes that we would bring greater equity by cutting those 6 positions. Our class sizes would have been brought more in line with each other. And as somebody who works in college access and success for low-income, first-generation students and students with disabilities, equity is at my core, as it was when I was the No Child Left Behind coordinator. So my experience in education says that, yes, sometimes additional funding is key, but quite often, the interventions that will actually change lives and change trajectories don't cost anything. They're in the way that the education is delivered, such as IB, or in the relationships between students and teachers. And those things do not necessarily cost more money.
So Alicia wanted to interject, and then I have Jenna and Marnie.
So I do just want to say one thing real quick. I'm obviously come at this from a money perspective. For me, this is, certainly about the students and what's student facing, but I do want to just point out to everyone this thing that we're going to talk about again tomorrow, so I apologize in advance for those of you that are going to have to come back tomorrow. So this is something we're going to look at with the council tomorrow, and the question was, we actually brought up to the council, and I'll go through it in a minute. when they were talking about adding positions, and we kind of said, we just want to remind you last year that we cut 14 positions alone at central office last year. Certainly some of those were repurposed, but we cut 14 positions at central office alone last year. We cut another, handful of positions more at the schools last year. So this is something that I put together that we're going to talk about tomorrow, but this is a combination of the 2 years, and I just want to highlight, so when we're saying that we're adding things for the Portland Promise, for the most part, every investment that we've made, we have reduced somewhere else. That was especially true last year, and even this year, when you can look at our FY19 plan and our book on our staffing page, we are actually net down positions. So at central office in the last 2 years, we've reduced 18.74 positions. We've added back 5.7. We're a net down 13.04. And at the schools, we've reduced 25 positions over the last 2 fiscal years, and we've added back 24.25. The investments are going into the schools. They are not going into central administration. This has been something we've done over the last 2 years. And again, in total, FTE-wise, we are net down almost 14 positions over the 2 years. And I really think, our budget is going up because we are 80% people, and even in cutting 14 people, it's still going to go up. Our budget is going up this year by $2 million of debt service that we are not receiving a net increase from the state. Our debt's built right into that flat funding. These are things I think that it's really important to remind everyone that, yes, there were investments proposed in this budget, but there were offsets in this budget to make room for those. So this is something we're going to go through with the Finance Committee tomorrow, but I just thought it was important to talk about here right now.
Can you email this out to everybody?
Yeah, I believe you have it.
You have it already.
It's in the finance.
It's in the,
I sent it.
the one for tomorrow.
I sent it
Can,
an hour ago.
Oh, okay.
I know there are board members waiting, so I can wait. So just go ahead.
Great.
Put me in the queue.
Jenna, Marnie, and then Javier.
You're in the queue. Oops,
Good to
sorry.
know you're joining the queue, Javier. I just kind of want to react a little to some of the discussion about the direction that we're going in terms of, whether we want to initiate a conversation around reductions around a 5% impact, or, letting, not wanting to have that conversation and waiting for the council to come back at us with a number. And so I want to echo what others, what Superintendent Batana, what, Anna has, Chairwoman Travado has said, that, we're at this place because, we were asked very specifically, very directly from the city, from members of the City Finance Committee, number one, what is the range of impact, that additional cuts would have. They want to be able to understand what the magnitude of it is. And so being able to reimagine education, and reorganize our work, would, is great. But if we aren't prepared to answer that question, we could be left with the 2%, or, whatever the bottom line that they want is. And so I really want to, make sure that we're all taking this conversation very seriously. We had another question from a counselor, from a Finance Committee member that directly asks, if we were to cut this budget further, where would we go? And so, what we could say tomorrow is, well, the superintendent had a conversation with the board about, areas that he would propose for us to look at, and the board didn't want to have that conversation. Or we can say, we actually took a look at it, and, we understand that, some of these things are going to be hard choices, and, that includes, teachers. It includes some of the programming, the investments that we had. I really want to kind of redirect the conversation a little bit to why we're doing this in the first place, which is that we have questions on the table from our city finance committee members, and as a board, we have an obligation to respond. And Superintendent Batana, Alicia, staff have been fantastic about being responsive and, all of these demands at once. But I think we also need to take a look and, have these conversations as well.
Marnie.
Just for clarification, so on the sheet we're looking at, the reduction list there, those are ones that are still, of course, have not been taken out of the budget. Is that correct? Correct. So when I look at, when you're talking about, Anna, 5%, let's look at that column, for example. And then I see numbers under the 5%, like it already lists middle school electives, elementary class size, and then the high school number. Help me understand that. Is that where you're proposing that would be?
That would be my next.
That would be your suggestion for that 5% there. So, okay. So what if we didn't say that? I mean, what I mean is, if we looked at that, your recommendation at 5%, and said, I'm sorry, I can't do any of those things, but it looks like we're going to need to get to about...
1.174 million.
That's the amount we still have to find. Okay. All right, just wanted to clarify what you meant by each of those columns. Thank you. I'm sorry I'm not helpful at all with that.
Superintendent?
So I just wanted to note, to put this in context, because I hear statements like lots of invoices, and I just want to be very clear that the extent of what we are requesting to add are in this order. The Teacher Planning Institute, which is $183,000. The Director of Social Emotional Learning, $122,000. Expanded Learning Opportunity Coordinators at both Deering and Portland High School at $187,000. Social worker at Riverton, $86,000. Increases, which are not, they are here, adult ed positions at $1.5 million. 1.5 positions at adult ed for $92,000. So that's the extent of the investments. So that's roughly $1 million in a $111 million budget. And so when I hear lots of invoices, it sounds to me like we're increasing our expenditures, and that is, roughly 1% of our expenditures. So I just want to be very clear so that people in the audience and people watching at home don't think that we're just going hog wild and spending millions of dollars to achieve the goals that we set out to achieve. As Alicia documented, we've made significant reductions to offset these increases last year and into this year. So I 100% agree with you that this is not about just adding, and I want to be clear that we've not just added, that we have also reduced. And again, I am, out on a limb saying I would prefer to, if we had to, not my preference, but if we had to, I would prefer to eliminate those middle school electives over reducing these other investments, because I believe that these other investments, you ask for us to sort of balance and weigh, and I'm prepared to defend those investments over those, over the middle school class, the middle school electives. And so I'm 100% prepared to do that.
Lori.
And, I did not mean to sound flippant or anything else by saying invoices, except for those of us who are middle class in Portland, $1 million is a lot of money. And in school budgets, that's a fair amount of money as well. And in recent memory, that's a fair amount of money and a fair amount of an increase in a school budget in an environment where we have received less income and where we are dealing with anticipated increases to our teacher contract and to our debt service that are not surprises to us. We knew they were coming. And it may well be that you and I differ philosophically on what we would include and what we would cut, and that's fine. Every member of the board may have a different approach to how they would weigh things as we go forward and what we feel is the most important. But I don't want for a moment to have the public think that an increase of $1 million, even in a budget this size, is something that is just normal or not a serious thing to be thoroughly discussed. So that, I think, we owe to the public, because they're going to sit down at their kitchen tables and figure out how to write that tax check. And their incomes may not have gone up, will not have gone up as much as their taxes will have. And so I think we owe it to discuss that seriously and thoughtfully, because we are making a big ask around the kitchen tables in this community. And we need to be absolutely certain that our families in the middle class and the lower middle class, remember that the median income in Portland is in the mid-40s. These are families for whom the extra cup of coffee a month is not something that's real. And the increase that will be asked for in their tax bill will mean that they will cut something. So if we don't cut something, they will cut something around their kitchen table. And so I just want us to realize that and to think about it seriously, that $1 million in a budget this size is still a substantial amount of money to ask from our public.
Mark?
I think we've come to a point. The superintendent, he's went out on a limb and suggested his proposed cuts in this hypothetical, if we had to, at 5%. I think we should do the same and just go down the line and just express whoever wants to participate and just go down line by line and see where we can get, if we can get to a 5% reduction. Either we do that or we just decide to go home, because at this point, we're just wasting time.
I agree. So, do you want to just do that? Go line by line through?
I'm open to any, I mean, I've put out there what I would do to get to 5.
So let's do that for board members who are willing to participate. If you're not, and the only thing you have to say is, I can't support that, we'll take that input as well. Ms. Thompson?
I just want to, I guess since everybody's clarifying their stances, with regards to not willing to do it, I don't think that Mr. Rodriguez or Ms. Morioni or myself or any other are saying we're not willing to do it. I'm just saying we've been here every single year for the most part since I've been here. And yes, this is a lot worse, I think, than we've seen in a long time. But to my point of going down the line here, I don't want it to be seen as that we're pushing back. We're pushing back from the sense of that we're pushing back, I guess, to make more reductions, as Mr. Balafons, alluded to, is because they have a job now to do. We did our job, and it went to the council, and now I want them to come back and tell us exactly the amount that they can live with, and then we'll go back again. So I think all of us have seen this list time and time again. I appreciate the staff and superintendent, making recommendations, but again, it's not that unwillingness from this side of the dais that we're willing to have the conversation, just need to know the end figure. So that's my thought. That's all.
Ms. Vendel?
I just wanted to clarify that there will be no back and forth between our bodies. Whatever comes back from the council will be what the final number. So that's also why there's, okay, I just want to clarify that.
So I'll start off. So if we look at 5%, middle school electives and elementary class sizes, I would not eliminate those. I don't know if anyone wants to keep those. I'm sorry, maybe I should make it clear. I want it to be 0 there. Is that all right? So I don't want
Middle school electives.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone wants to keep those reductions or.
They're not at the top of my list. I think I would look elsewhere before I would go there. I'm not saying they wouldn't be something I would consider. It would depend what the target was I had to hit, but they're not I don't put them in the same priority as the superintendent has, at least at the moment. And people should understand that this is our thoughts at this point in time and might not be our thoughts tomorrow or 2 days from now or 3 weeks from now.
Anyone else input on the middle school electives?
I guess I was going to speak to the elementary class sizes. I would not like to see the elementary class sizes increase, especially when looking at some of the analyses and seeing that Reiki and Riverton were two of the schools that would be losing teachers. I think that that strikes me as going against our equity goal.
Ms. Davis?
I'd be glad to talk with you a little bit more about, because what I saw when I did that analysis was actually something different, that it actually brought all class sizes into a degree of conformance with our ranges. And I was also concerned about the equity issue, because I saw that clearly our higher SES schools, our more privileged and advantaged schools, have lower class size and would continue to maintain that lower class size. And so that does raise for me a question about why that is, that those schools, and some of them are actually below the minimums. But the other factor that rolls in there is that if we flip the page and we look at our Title I funding, frequently we'll see that, and I haven't had a chance to do this yet, but typically what you will see is that there are additional positions funded through Title I, and this is the design of Title I, actually, to compensate for the poverty in those schools to provide additional staff. So I would like to investigate that a little clearer, but I actually thought my read of this is we simply were right-sizing our elementary class sizes for this point in time and brought more equity and more parity to our class sizes for next year based on the data we have at this point in time. We actually had some wide variations, and that for, I think it's 77% of the class grades across the schools, there was no change in the class size. There was literally no impact. So it was not that this suddenly increased everybody's class sizes and no class moves out of range. And we currently have classes that are out of range. And we brought in, we still have 8 classes, I believe, that would be below the minimums as opposed to 12, which is that's a responsible cost savings for us. We should do that in response to, it simply brought them up into the range, and not necessarily to the top. In some cases, but not necessarily. So I see that one as one I would do. In fact, as I said earlier, I think it just is good business and should have been done before the budget came to the board. Typically has been done in the past before the budget comes to the board.
So I can share my thoughts on those 2 items. Similarly, I'm not sure that middle school electives would be the first place that I would naturally go. However, I'm glad that Superintendent Botana kind of spoke to priorities in terms of, prioritizing the new investments over that, because I think the thing about middle school electives is that we have it now. And so to me, the question is, how do you justify taking away something that we have now for things that we, that are additions? So I guess I'd be interested to kind of hear more about that justification before, necessarily taking a firm stance. But middle school elective seems to me to be a place that does reach our equity goal, and it's one of those sort of extra things that we have that sort of sets Portland apart as not just adequate, but great. And so that's my thought on that. On the class sizes, we've heard a lot about class sizes, and I think I maybe need to sit with the data or just learn a little more about it. I'm not 100% convinced that class sizes would explode. So that might be one that I could possibly live with, depending on, what it really looks like. And I know that we have what it really looks like, and I haven't been able to sit with it long enough to know for sure. And again, we are talking in a hypothetical situation that we're not recommending to the council. Other thoughts, Holly?
I want to thank the staff and the superintendent for your work on this, hypothetically, how we go forward with this. And I know, we can't haggle with the council, we get what we get. And, but I also think that, volunteering to cut this and this and this might not set the best precedent. I don't know if we're going to be doing this every year now, if this is just like a one-time thing, or is this going to be, part of how we move forward from now on, which I would think would be unfortunate because we have so much work to do. And so I think we need to cross the bridge when we get there. Like Sarah has said, this happens constantly. Unfortunately, the school board and the budget gets, maybe not the, we get pushed to the side, I think, in a lot of ways, if you look at comparison of city budget to our work and how important it is for students, and not interested in expanding classroom sizes just because that's something we've talked about since I got onto the board in 2012, is in priding ourselves to try to keep classroom sizes on the smaller end. And I don't want this to become a race to the bottom over equity. And I'm not sure if cutting electives is necessarily the best way to go about this as well. And of course, I've always been supportive of teachers and ed techs as well. So I really appreciate the work. I just hope that this doesn't set a precedent for us in the future. Thank you.
Jenna, and then Sarah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in terms of the items that we have in front of us, I guess the biggest area that gives me pause around the elementary class size reductions, and this is something we've had significant discussions that at the finance committee level, and have been, overall, that was, an area that I was okay with us moving forward on, but I just want to voice some hesitation on my end after reviewing some of the additional information that we got in our packets, just around, and then looking at the timeline around, reductions over time, and so I guess the concern that I have in the elementary class size potential reductions is the impact that it would have on the classroom support level. And so one thing that I've noticed, and one thing that's been clear to me, for a very long time, is how the district has, over the years, in very hard times, have managed to make reductions to places like ed techs. And so, having the numbers really clear in the last page, or closer to the end of the packet that we have in front of us, resonates clear as day. And so, thinking about that, and thinking about the trade-offs that we have at the elementary level, if we don't have extra support staff in the classroom, because we've made those reductions over time, how are we going to manage the potential increases in class size over the years. And so I just wanted to put that out there as something that I've been thinking about, as not as comfortable with, but I know that if we actually, this is all in hypothetical, I just want you to know that's an area that I've been looking at as a place of concern. And then to follow up with, the point that Tim made around, the cost of, education and, the cost being inequity, I'd actually like to add that it's not just equity that we're paying for. We're investing in social emotional learning. We're investing in whole student, and that, social workers, an entire department that's, working with, teachers and with staff at the building level to, to work with, to make, our schools more culturally responsive, and, that we're developing resiliency in our students at the building level. I feel like that is, that's an area that, we also need to be talking about in terms of what we're investing in and what we're making clear and conscious decisions about. I mean, none of these look at all appetizing, but I mean, I feel like, at the end of the day, it's what we could live with if we are able to, preserve some of the things that we've invested in terms of social emotional learning, expanded learning opportunities. That's about it.
Anyone else? Oh, Sarah.
So I guess, and then I'll be done, I promise. So making the tough choices and being asked to make the tough choices and being perceived that we're not willing to make the tough choices, I have to say, over the 12 years that I've been here, we have made a lot of tough choices. We've cut middle school sports, we've had teacher layoffs, we've had ed tech layoffs, we've reorganized central office, we had reduction in time allotted for music, we laid off assistant principals, and they bought them back, trading off other things. So to have the note that we're not willing to make the tough choices, I think is an inaccurate statement, because I think we are all willing to roll up our sleeves. And just for me, again, it comes down to, I'm willing to make the tough choices, and we'll go through and talk about every single line item, but I want to know how much money we have, period. At least half of us that are here on this board have made those decisions over these years. So we're tried and true, and we're known commodities of what we will do if we have to. So I'm willing to go there if we have to, but again, I'm not going to make any reductions, and I don't want to be perceived that I'm not willing to make the tough choices to save the taxpayers' money or to get to the council's final bottom line. We'll go there. We've been there. We'll do it. We've been $2 million in the hole out of the gate. We'll figure it out. Just tell me how much money we have. Thanks.
Anyone else? Alicia.
So while I certainly appreciate that we don't want to offer up choices for them to say, oh, look how easy it is, I think the intent of this was to make it harder, to put a face on the number. So I think that's sort of where we're coming from and why we brought this forward to say, this is what we would come back to you with if you made us, come in at a 3% increase. So I think that's why we were thinking doing it ahead of time, so that when, that number came up tomorrow, we could clearly say, not clearly because there's no official vote, but.
We could totally choose other. I appreciate that, and I totally get what you're saying, Alicia, but we could make totally different decisions than what's here, because they may come back to us and say, we want you to be at 2%, God forbid. But things like that. So, I mean, I appreciate the time. You've spent a lot of time, as have a lot of staff, and we've done the exercise now. So here's where we would go. We pass it off, and then we'll make the decision. So I appreciate, again, the work that you've done. It shows them that we're willing to make the tough choices, that staff has looked at this, and we'll go there when we have to go there. So the exercise is done.
Marnie?
I noticed that you did not move over closing peaks and cliff. And I get that. And this is, as we're going hypothetical down the rabbit hole here, I'm going to say to the council, you close Port Peaks and Cliff if that's what you, I mean, in other words, exactly, they can't do it. And I wonder why, just as I can't cut any more out of this. So point being is that if I had to sit at the table, and I can be there tomorrow night, but bottom line is, let that be it. We're going to close Peaks and Cliff. Now, what will you do, council? So bottom line is, none of this is appealing to me, and that's how much I hate the idea, is that I would never close Peaks and Cliff, and I want them to also recognize that that's the option in my mind. It's none of this is appetizing, but that will actually show them that, okay, that's where we could choose it, and that would be a quick and easy $500,000 right there at the gate. But bottom line, what I'm trying to make an analogy here of how frustrating it is to be, sit across the room and automatically have a list, but that's not even on there as an option. I get that, but I'm just saying we may want to add it as an option and take off some of the other things that would be hard hitting to, just. I'm frustrated, sorry.
Yeah, so I will explain why Peaks is not on that list, although, if we went below 3%, it would probably have to be on that list.
Mm-hmm.
But, my thinking on that is that we've made a commitment to looking at our entire portfolio of buildings for next year, and as part of that, and we've said that we wouldn't close any of the buildings on the mainland as a result of that. Because we were doing that, we wouldn't do that this year. And so I just carried that logic over to the Peaks conversation, because we will be looking at, all of our schools and whether it makes sense to have the schools that we currently have and how we would reapportion those. So that's why I did not include it in here.
Roberto?
I just have a question. When we talk about the class sizes, do we know in our buildings what our average class size is expected to hold? So I'm asking specifically about the new Hall school, because I think as I was talking to, I forgot who, they mentioned that the school is designed with class sizes that would hold about, in a perfect, circumstance, 21 students. So 21 is what the infrastructure of that building. And again, I'm not saying that was accurate. I'm just saying something that was mentioned to me. I'm just using it as part of my question. So, so do we have information to tell us that? So, for example, I'm wondering if when we look at these numbers, do these physical structures, do these buildings, can they sustain these class sizes?
Yes, they can.
Yeah. So in the new Hall school, does that sound familiar to you, like what the class size classrooms were designed to hold?
Yeah. 21 would be no, the classrooms in Hall will hold regular size classrooms.
Generally,
they will accommodate
those are
our
generally
student-teacher
built for
ratio.
classrooms of 30.
30.
Yeah.
That's the number I was looking for to get.
Yeah.
Thresholds are.
Where Hall will be under capacity is that it's built for 558 students, and we are proposing to have 411 in it next year. So that's, that's the part that's small. It may result, if they use all of that space, depending on how they use it, you could end up with, splitting some things apart. I'm not sure how they will intend to do that. But no, the state is, in a state school, you've got targets that you're hitting.
30 was the number?
They're
30?
making sure that our classrooms are big enough.
Sorry, I'm not sure. Are we trying to go down through the list and talk about them line by line, or do we want to be a little bit more freewheeling as we have. Because I think one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is the reduction of contract days combined with the Teacher Planning Institute idea that came up at the last round of the finance. I think that's smart. I mean, I don't think it's ideal. It wouldn't be my first choice, but I think that I would prefer that over reducing middle school electives or elementary class size, and it's of a similar value. Well, not value is the wrong word, but a similar cost. So just throwing that out there for discussion.
Mark.
I agree with Tim on those two.
Sarah.
Did we not already discuss the fact that the PEA said they would not reduce contract days? Can you go over that again? Because I thought we had,
So this does not include PEA.
This does not reduce contract days for teachers.
okay.
Reduces student.
It reduces student days.
Right, but the student days thing, I thought we also had proposed, and they said that that would have to be
No,
open.
that is not a PEA decision. That is
Okay.
a board decision.
Well, I know that we set the
the-
calendar, and yeah.
Right, the savings there come from not doing the Summer Institute, which would be extra pay.
Those two are
for
tied together.
80% of our
Bingo.
secondary
Okay.
teachers.
Gotcha, thank you.
And savings in transportation and some other staff who wouldn't be required to work that day, who can be reduced.
So yeah, I guess if I had to pick from this list things to get us down to 5%, that would be probably at the top of my list.
Just so
I
that
think-
I want, absolute transparency around that. That is 2 days that we would not pay teachers extra, but it would also mean that our ed techs, some of our base staff, some of our, and all of our non-represented staff would get paid, roughly 1.2% less. So they would actually see a reduction in their wages by having what in essence would be furlough days or, fewer contract days in their days, just so that it's very clear to the public and to staff that might be, watching and listening that would be the implication of that.
Right. And the as far as which days the proposal was to do it on the 2 student days prior to Labor Day?
Yes,
Right.
that would be the days that we would not have student days.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
Oh, no, I'm just saying rabbit hole.
Okay.
That's my motion.
So from what I just heard from people, if we were to remove middle school electives, leave elementary class size, we have not talked about high schools at all, that is in this proposal, and we were to move the reduction of contract days and teacher planning, that would get us to 4.99% in this column. Do you want to talk about what's been proposed for high school?
Since that's something where it had been, I think, just a big number before, and we now have some specifics, I think it would be helpful to go through what of this is a cut to an existing locally funded service, what is perhaps right-sizing, because frequently we have reduced a position or part of a position here or there in the high schools based on changes in enrollment, and sort of what the rationale was for each of these things, and a little bit more about them. I know what some of them are, and some I can support, some others I wasn't completely sure. So perhaps, so that all the board is on the same page.
So this is on page 16 of 18 in tonight's packet. And to be very clear, these are what have been proposed by the principals. This is not, this is what they came up with. The way that we did this was we took the 400,000 because at the time there were similar sizes being reduced at the elementary level, and split it up proportionally based on the size of the school's budget. So Casco Bay was asked to come up with 61,000. Portland was asked to come up with 160,000, and Deering was asked to come up with 179,000. These are the places where they chose. They were not all positions. Some of it was reducing their allocation, so their instructional supplies lines, they chose to reduce in those places, and so it is not all people. This is where they are. I can read through. So Casco Bay chose to reduce.
I don't think you need to
Okay,
read.
we don't have to go through.
I don't think it's necessary
It's up
to
here.
read through it if you have any questions about them. And we do have 2 out of the 3 principals here that can answer, their rationale better than we can, so. So if you have any questions, ask, and they will.
I think for both us and the public, it would be helpful to hear the rationale of why those particular things were selected. I mean, I can, in essence, respect the principal's choice. It's their building, but I think it would be helpful so that people don't misinterpret or develop their own story about what these are or why they were picked, to hear from the people who made that choice.
First, you want?
I'll go first.
Okay.
Nothing is easy,
No.
as you've all talked about. I think that one of the things that I looked at was this would be offering basic and not any other elective offerings, to bring up the word elective again, in the content areas that I'm looking at making a cut in. So it would mean not offering electives in the area of science and English language arts and other services for our at-risk students. So those would be the positions that the specific people positions that I made cuts in.
So at Deering, the stipends would be co- and extracurricular related. Anatomy Leadership is a specific program that we've had in the schools for a long time. We have some other leadership programs as well. So the per pupil allocation, we were going to get a little more money this year for supplies and books and that type of thing. So like with Sheila, we cut back some on that. We're looking at a potential cut in world language. The Arabic was based on initial enrollments. That might shift, that might change some. The English position is, I'm going to skip and come back to the mentoring. The English position has been a yearly contract that the staff, that's been not a continuing contract position, but a yearly contract position, and that's based on a couple of other teachers who are doing work for us around our model, to be an international school. And so as they do that work, they're released from teaching, and this position compensates to teach those classes. And also there's a lot of PD that work that's being done to provide structure and set up professional development for the entire staff. Same thing, those 2 things, working on the international schools model and professional development for the staff. That 1.0 position is teaching the classes that those folks would teach. Deering isn't planning on renewing the contract with the provider that we've worked with around the international school model, but we're going to continue to do the work. So that was a $25,000 contract, which is not in this. We decided to make that choice before the budget season really gets started. But we still need those people to do that work, and there's been a lot of work this year, a lot of great work this year, that some of which folks have read about because it's been covered in the news, and some of which goes on behind the scenes, and people would be teaching instead of doing that work. And then the 0.6 science position is just a cut in classes. We've scheduled the school at this point. We would have to remove some classes. We have some, I call them kind of core elective classes that a large number of students take, but they're not core chemistry, physics, or space. There are other related science classes that would have to go. And the mentoring coordinator we've had just for the first year, and it's been a terrific program with lots of plans for next year. So we would talk about scaling that back to half-time to still maintain a footprint with that program, but just a difficult choice to make. The other thing I would say overall about our cuts are on the teaching side is that we have reworked how we're approaching our schedule, and to give students a lot more support next year, which I think the high school really needs, and we would not be able to do that as robustly with those reductions, but we would work on doing the best we could.
I just want to add, because I see the list up there now, is that our positions is not that they didn't have signups for it, so I just kind of did a calculation. There were about 120 students who wouldn't have a course to be in. So when we look at the impact there, I think Mr. Palmer and I kind of worked together around the stipends, so we would work together on the stipends that weren't offered at our school that we share, being Anatomy of Leadership, and then the others we would look at just looking at where we could reduce a stipend, and that would be by not offering a co-curricular, like, you know, a literary magazine or drama, not drama and speech, the debate team, something like that. We try to balance where there might be other places students could participate in something that was similar, but we have to look at that cut. That's what we would do.
Questions?
Thank you. So, I mean, my thought on that, if what we're giving back to the council tomorrow is sort of a revised version of 0.5, or of a 5% based on this discussion, if we keep that in there, I definitely think we need this supporting material with it, because it's easy to look at 400,000 and not
I
see
can
the
break that
impact.
out too.
So, yeah.
We can break that out further.
Marnie?
I'm not in support of those things being cut at all. I'm going to say that probably often, but yeah.
Lori?
And I would just reiterate that I think we need to be very clear with the council that the board has not made any decisions. We, you know, as Ms. Thompson and Ms. Morioni have said, we have sent them our budget, and the superintendent has made some recommendations to the board, but clearly tonight the board has a variety of opinions about those, and whether we'd ultimately support them or not. So I don't think there's anything that the Finance Committee can really take from this discussion, except that until we know the target number, we're not sure exactly where we would go. You know, you've heard from some of us about where we are tonight, but I think we need to be careful that we don't say to the council, we haven't acted, we can't act, we can't amend our budget at this point. And what we have had is a workshop discussion, which is non-binding.
Mark?
Since we've been talking about making cuts to get down to 5%, I say let's keep going and let's look at it at 3%, and then that way everybody will know what we're really looking at as to what cuts are going to be. I mean, we had a hard time getting it down to 5%. Let's get our thoughts out there about 3%.
Middle school electives.
I guess, are we there yet? Are we at 5%? Have we really identified things that we're comfortable with?
I think the one change that we made was to take out world languages but put back in your suggestion, which got us to 4.9, leaving all else the same,
But let me
which we
just
didn't
sort of,
really.
because we just put our heads together on that. To get us to 4.9, that includes the high school.
Right.
Right, so, which you've just now started to discuss. It includes the high school. It includes class size reductions in the elementary schools. And then it also includes the 2-day institute and the 2 days for staff. So I guess, so before you just assume that you're at 5%, I want to double check that you're at 5%.
Yeah. Where are we with those reductions? We're at what, 4.9?
Yeah, that would get you.
4.99, so.
Okay. It sounded like the conversation was ending, so before it ended, I wanted to see if we were going to go to 3%.
You were there.
I mean, I think that is kind of the best that we can get to at this point, in terms of, I think that when we come back to the council, we need to be clear that the discussion tonight really was about how little we can support, how we don't support these reductions, and, with varying degrees. But, that was sort of the best place that we could land. And it does show impact.
So we didn't really talk about the bottom half of this spreadsheet, and I just wanted to go through that really quick so people understand what it is we're looking at. So at 5%, as we just talked about, it adds up to $1.2 million in reductions. It would bring the budget to $110.6 million. It would be a tax rate increase on the school side of 53 cents at 4.99%. And combined with the city's budget as currently proposed, it would be a 3.79% increase on the tax rate citywide. So just so that's how this form works. So as you move over, you can see both the impact on the school budget and on the overall city tax rate. I'd be happy to make copies of this for board members and share it with you so that you can move things around and work with the spreadsheet.
Lori?
I think the one other thing that hasn't really been discussed and was a change from what was in the previous version of this is just that we now have sort of a slowly increasing amount of a cut for adult ed. Can you talk about what that would include? It's like 25,000 in 1 year, 50, 80, 80.
So
Out of what was 150. So I'm a little confused because there were several things in adult ed, and some of it was,
so in the
had an
packet
offset
that
from
you
a
got-
retirement.
So the packet that you got tonight, there was 150 there. And then today at Cabinet, we did sort of the second version where we scaled that back. So the 150, it was very similar to the way the 400 started at the high school. We went to the Director of Adult Education, Anita St. Ange, and said, if you had to make a cut of 150,000, please tell us where you would do that. So thus far, she's been able to tell us where she would come up with 100,000. And then even then, in reworking this, we didn't get to that level of reduction. So
And just to sort of explain the rationale on going that route is that they have a $450,000 increase in the budget.
Yes.
And so this was a reduction to that increase of $150,000. We asked the director to determine how she thought she could do that. And so it's sort of looking at, scaling back some of the things that they would do.
Okay. Is it possible, because adult ed was one that I think was hard to get our it was in bits and pieces, I guess, and it still is, that, as you just said, there's a $450,000 increase in adult ed in your original budget proposal. Is it possible to get that, or do we have it somewhere, if you could direct me to it, all on one page, so I can really sort of see, and then also with what the reductions would be, because I don't know, was there a page in here?
So there wasn't.
Okay.
The reduction would be in temporary salaries. So any amount that comes out, that's where it would be coming out. And that is where we pay our adult ed teachers. So most of them are are just contracted services temp employees, so it would be a reduction in the number of classes that are offered at adult education. Essentially, that's where the reduction would come. That's what Anita talked to us about today, up to $100,000.
Okay. Could we get that in writing so we can kind of really wrap our heads around it? I'm a numbers person, but I don't do numbers auditorily. I really need them visually.
Yep. So
And then the other,
I'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
I will give you just the adult ed portion of the budget compared to FY18. In the information that I responded back to one of your questions today.
It might be.
The temporary salaries budget-wide are up $140-ish thousand, $173,000 of that, which is more than 140, just is in adult education. So the offset in the rest of the budget, temporary salaries, is down.
Okay.
So I will give you their budget, but
Okay,
that's
that
where
would,
it is.
that would be helpful in even getting that pulled out, and it may be in what you sent me. The other question I had was adult ed transfer to Street Academy. What is that?
So the Street Academy program is funded by the McKinney-Vento grant right now.
Yep.
It does not cover the entire cost of
Okay.
the program. So this is a local prop-up to the McKinney-Vento Street Academy program with adult ed local dollars, so that program is fully funded.
Okay. We've typically funded it in part, I think, for years. Is this, that there's a change in that funding stream, so more is required? Is this an increase? Is this held harmless? Is this just what?
So they had been funding it with bits and pieces of other grants on a rolling basis, and this
Okay.
would sort of take away that need to constantly find other funding sources and just fund a portion of that program out of local. That's
Okay.
something that we meet, our finance staff meets with Anita on a monthly basis, and it was always sort of a piecemeal of how that funding was coming about, and we said, let's add this to local in this year so that you're confident there's funding. We're not constantly looking for ways to get this funded, so.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, Marnie.
Since we have the high school principals here, looking at enrollment of classes, that breakdown I know that we weren't really supposed to look at, but that apparently is going to the council members.
No, I'm okay with looking at it. I wasn't okay with looking at it when we weren't talking about high schools. That was my only concern. But
You may talk about it now.
absolutely, it's there to be looked at.
Okay.
So just not at, Ms. Thompson was off her stride a little bit, and I just needed
Thank
to,
you.
yeah.
No, I only wanted to ask about looking at the course titles and then looking at the number, the count of students per class. We do have classes that say 2 students per class.
So just to.
And help me understand
So those
that.
are generally advanced classes that are usually combined with another class, so that,
Okay.
and I think all the 1s and 2s are in the arts realm, so they're kind of, you may have, and you see some of that with world languages as well, where you see somebody who's taking Spanish 5, that class does not meet as a Spanish 5, it's not in somebody's schedule as a Spanish 5 alone, so they have a advanced Spanish, and it combines for Spanish 4 and 5, or French 4 and 5, art studio and advanced art studio combined, so some of those smaller classes. I think the main takeaway for me from the class size analysis at the high school is, if you look at the bottom line, our classes are roughly, on average, it's 20. There is some variation. There's, classes that are, 14, but, you may have, one section that has 10 and another section that has 18 because it's a scheduling exercise. So, but I think the overall, the overall message from this is that our class sizes, are, there's nothing that jumped out at me as somebody who's done this work, extensively, nothing that jumps out as like this is completely out of control, so.
So my only request then would be to make sure when you bring this to the council to say exactly that, like just to point out, or even put it in the document there, because my thought was, okay, why wouldn't principals say, okay, we have some that are below 5 students in the class, so those we should take out. So just a note. Yeah, thank you.
My observation as a high school parent from some years ago is that these class sizes are much smaller than what my sons and daughter experienced, which is, sort of neither here nor there, but over time, these are smaller. We ran high school classes that were larger than this, and or at least in my personal, my children's experience and my experience working with Upward Bound when we were in Portland schools were fine, so. Smaller than most college students.
So I think we're probably at a wrapping up point. Unless anybody has any last words, I think we have kind of at least an idea of where we're going tomorrow. And, okay. All right.
Sorry, I just said that if, they were asked, if we were to be asked to make reductions, it would come from people and programs, and that's kind of everything that we've discussed, so.
Okay. And that concludes the workshop. Thank you guys.